today's video, I will be giving you guys 3 reasons why the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will finally get over the hump in 2025. Subscribe and like the video if you do go on to enjoy. Let's hop into it. And we are going to begin with my first reason as to why the Buccaneers will get over the hump in 2025, and that is because they have had a very productive offseason. So in this section, I want to talk about what this team did in free agency, and then we'll talk about what they did in the draft. I'll go into some detail with that, and then we'll hop into my second reason. Let us begin with the free agency process, where they were kind of relatively quiet this offseason in terms of the free agency portion. They did sign Haason Reddick. They brought in a punter, a backup corner, some depth options. Re-signing Chris Godwin was probably the biggest story of the offseason. And outside of that, Levante David and a handful of the other guys as well you brought back. In general, not a lot to talk about here with the free agency process. The Haason Reddick signing is just one of those kind of short-term, one-year deals that potentially could be a big-time pickup if it ends up working out. It's a high-reward, low-risk ordeal. This is a Buccaneers team that doesn't really have a culture problem. So with all the question marks with Reddick and his contract situations that's been going on over the course of the last 2 years, I'm not too worried about that potentially affecting this team because this is a Buccaneers team that has a great culture, head coach, and in general, just a great setup for a guy like Haason Reddick. If he goes in there, gives you 8+ sacks, you'll feel awesome about that addition, and maybe you can work a long-term deal next year. But in terms of this 1 year, $14 million deal, as I mentioned, high reward with very low risk. Bringing Chris Godwin in on a 3-year, $66 million deal is, for starters, a really solid contract for a player of his caliber. Paying a guy only $22 million annually, who, in my opinion, is truly one of the best second or even sometimes third options in the NFL, makes a lot of sense. He's also just a great culture fit, a great guy in the locker room. His connection with Baker and Mike Evans and a handful of other guys, it did make a lot of sense. Admittedly speaking, there is some concern here with this one because of the injury he's coming off of. But I'm not generally too concerned about that because Chris Godwin's game is not really based off of athleticism and being speedy and dynamic. It's a 3-year deal. It's not breaking the bank for him, so I'm not too worried about this one potentially ending up being a bad contract. I really just believe that Chris Godwin's a super hard worker, and I think he'll return to form pretty quickly. Even if he's never like a 1,300, 1,100 yard receiving guy, I could see him being a consistent 800 to 900 yard guy who plays opposite of Mike Evans and, of course, the guy they drafted in the first round, who we'll talk about here in a moment. Re-signing Ben, and I hope I said this right, Ben Bredesen. I hope I said that right. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. 3 years, $22 million. He's a solid guard. Definitely nothing special by no means, but solid enough. Gets the job done. 3 years, 22. I like the contract. Not a long-term risk there either. Levante David is a veteran. This is a linebacking core, admittedly speaking, for Tampa Bay that I think is a little bit weak. So having a guy like a Levante David who is a veteran, has been on the team for a while, good culture fit, can kind of do a lot of things for this team. I like the addition of bringing him back for a 1-year deal. Again, admittedly speaking, I don't love the linebacking core for Tampa Bay. I would have liked to have seen them be a bit more aggressive in addressing that spot, but bringing back Levante David I thought was a fine move. Let's now go ahead and talk about the 2025 Buccaneers draft. So this was a pretty short draft for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Round 1, Emeka Egbuka. Round 2, Benjamin Morrison. Round 3, Jacob Parrish. Round 4, David Walker. Round 5, Elijah Roberts. And round 7, Tez Johnson. I like this draft a lot. We're going to go through this one pick by pick, and at the end, I'll give you guys my general thoughts of this draft class. The Emeka Egbuka pick in round 1, at the time, I did not quite understand. And fully transparent here, I do think I maybe would have went a different direction if I was the GM of the Buccaneers. With that said, if you wanted to have a surefire hit, a guaranteed potential superstar, a guaranteed potential role player that was going to be one of the key guys in your rosters for the next 5 to 10 years, Emeka Egbuka is about as surefire as they get. His game is so translatable from college to the NFL level. He's not somebody who is purely based on physicality or purely based off of speed. He's such a complete and versatile player that can play multiple positions, super smart. He's not the fastest guy or the most physical guy. He's not going to win a lot of 50-50 balls or anything like that. But you want to talk about a guy who's like the perfect replacement for Chris Godwin when his time is up with Tampa Bay, it's Emeka Egbuka. And the nice thing too about this is kind of when you look at this Buccaneers offense and kind of the receivers in this unit, it's a lot of kind of older guys who are kind of probably going into their tail end of their career. Mike Evans, as great as he's been in his career, he's been in the league for quite some time. Chris Godwin's coming off a major injury, and while he's still relatively young, you know, eventually he's going to get older. Last year, you also brought in Jalen McMillan, who showed some glimpses of being a potential really solid second or third option. Now you added Emeka Egbuka, who, for me, I don't know if if he'll ever really be a go-to wide receiver 1, but if he's your go-to wide receiver 2 and a consistent target for Baker Mayfield for the foreseeable future, you feel really good about that, and it's a good pick if it ends up working out. Again, there is probably some other moves on the table that I would have, thought about doing with this pick, but at the end of the day, I don't hate the pick at all. I think Emeka Egbuka will work out for this team, and he's going to be an awesome player for many years to come. In case you're wondering who I would have taken at this spot that they decided not to take, I would have probably took Jahad Campbell. I know there's the injury concern with him, but just think he's an awesome linebacker prospect that I would have personally taken here. I'm not mad about the Emeka Egbuka pick at all, though. And then in round 2, of course, Benjamin Morrison. Benjamin Morrison is such a high upside pick here, but of course, there is going to be the concerns about his hip and that injury that he dealt with at Notre Dame. Prior to that injury, though, in the few games we saw him in this year and the years beyond, he's shown glimpses of being an awesome cornerback. And for a team in Tampa Bay that already has a lot of solid pieces in the secondary that was just kind of missing that cornerback 1 on the outside, I do think Benjamin Morrison could be that guy, assuming he stays healthy. And of course, the bigger thing here, assuming that he comes back from that injury 100%. He's well-sized, around 6 foot, 193, a very competitive player. Also, by the way, his reaction to getting drafted was just awesome. He seems like a really good kid, a really good culture fit. He's strong, he's physical, he's solid in flipping his hips, of course, when he was healthy. If he can return back to form after this injury, this was a guy who a lot of people would have drafted round 1. And maybe I'm not in that boat. I would have probably had him as a late round 1, early round 2 guy if he had managed to stay healthy for the full season. But I really think Benjamin Morrison is just an awesome player, and to get him in the later end of round 2, I thought it made a lot of sense. Sticking to cornerback here, Jacob Parrish in round 3, a very athletic freak cornerback who's not the biggest guy, not the most physical guy. He's 5'10", 191, just a really solid athlete, and I think he has versatility to play a lot of different positions. Based off the depth chart, they do currently have him, at least on ESPN, listed as a nickel, with Benjamin Morrison playing on the outside. But I think with Tyke Smith having his flexibility to play multiple positions, I can kind of see a world where a guy like Jacob Parrish becomes that starting nickel. Maybe you move Tyke Smith to a bit more of a safety role, or maybe you move somebody else somewhere else. In general, I think Jacob Parrish just gives you a lot more elements to add to your secondary. And again, you bring in a Benjamin Morrison as well. I love the addition of these two guys because I think they play perfectly next to each other, again, assuming Benjamin Morrison stays healthy. Outside of Benjamin Morrison, you then brought in 2 back-to-back edge rushers in David Walker and Elijah Roberts. 2 edge rushers that are going to be depth pieces for the future. Not too sure how much productivity you're going to get from them immediately, but as time does go on, maybe they could be a part of your future rotation. So I'm hopeful that there's something there with them. And then in round 7, Tej Johnson. Of course, the story with Tej Johnson is that he was very productive at Oregon, was at times their go-to guy, but he's just so light and his combine performance was not of the caliber that you would expect for somebody who is legitimately 170 pounds or even less than that. I do kind of have a hard time imagining what Tej Johnson can look like in the NFL, just because it's so hard for me to believe that somebody who's listed at 5'10", 154 pounds, I think that maybe he could put a bit of weight on, but even if he gets to 165, that's such a small size for a receiver, and I just have a hard time really seeing him have a role unless you completely use him as a gadget guy and maybe the speed translate a bit more on the field. I will say, if there was a team that I think could maybe make this work out, it might be Tampa Bay, because you do have a Mike Evans, you do have a Chris Godwin, and a Emeka Egbuka, but none of those guys are necessarily speedsters. McMillan can, be a fast guy as well, but if you're kind of looking for a bit more of that gadget guy, maybe Tej Johnson could be there. I think he's a smart player. I think he's quite shifty and athletic, but I really worry about that 154-pound range that he might be at. That's just too small for me to see him seriously succeed. All in all, though, I thought this was an awesome draft. I think you instantly have a day 1 starter and a future really solid role player in Emeka Egbuka. I think he's just such a safe prospect that I absolutely love the fit with. If Benjamin Morrison comes back from his injury 100%, you're talking about a potential cornerback 1 on the outside. And if Jacob Parrish works out, he could probably be your starting nickel. So right now I'm looking at potentially 3 starters as soon as next year or the year after, again, assuming the best here. Then you have 2 rotational edge that can play big roles for your team in the future. All in all, when you have a draft of this caliber where you have this many impactful guys, I think it's a valid draft, and I give this team a thumbs up in terms of the draft process In terms of free agency, I would have liked them to be a bit more aggressive, but I think they did a fine job in this draft to really fix up a lot of their issues. Again, I will reiterate, I would have liked to have seen a linebacker be taken at some point because I think that was a big issue for them, but I got to give them credit. I don't think they've reached in any of these picks here. Just thought it was the right picks. But with that said, let's go ahead and move over to my second reason as to why the Buccaneers can get over the hump in 2025, and that is that this is a pretty darn loaded roster. So in this section, I want to talk about the entire depth chart, starting with the offense, then going over to the defense. When I look at this Buccaneers team, we're going to begin with this offense. Baker Mayfield, you have Bucky Irving, Rashad White, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan, and Emeka Egbuka, Cade Otton, Tristan Wirfs, Ben Bredesen, Graham Barton, Cody, and then Luke Godek. Just in general, a really solid offense with Baker Mayfield, who we'll talk about in a bit more detail here in just a moment. He's continuing to arise and become an awesome starting quarterback, arguably a top 10 guy in the league. Bucky Irving had an awesome rookie season, a freak athlete, can do so many things in the passing game, and honestly, it was just awesome in his rookie year. Pair him up with Rashad White. There's a nice little duo right there. You're about 4 to 5 deep in the receiving core, maybe potentially 6 deep if Tez Johnson works out. I think there's some holes, maybe not holes is not the right question, but some things to fix up with this offensive line in the future. But for now, I think it's good enough. And I think also in the future, getting a bit more of a more talented tight end one, I also think could go a long way. All in all, I do think this Buccaneers offense is one of the best offenses out there. When you look at their statistics from the 2024 season, they were 4th in points per game, 3rd in yards per game, 4th in touchdowns per game, awesome in the red zone, awesome on 4th down, awesome on 3rd down. They were top 10 in most rushing statistics, and then passing the football wise were also almost always in the top 10. I do believe that losing Liam Cohen could potentially be a big time issue for this team, but I just think the personnel is so talented and so good that I'm not too overly concerned about losing a guy like Liam Cohen, especially if they did a good enough job of replacing him with somebody better than him or just as good. Can this offense maybe take a step back because of that? Yes, but even if they take a step back, I'm not expecting a huge drastic decrease. Like at worst, this is the 6th or 7th best offense, but at its best, it's a top 5 offense. I also think just adding Emeka Egbuka and hoping that Chris Godwin comes back fully formed is just going to allow this offense to be just incredibly dynamic in the receiving core. So yes, good luck stopping this offense. And then on the defensive side of things, of course, Logan Hall. You also have Elijah Roberts in the draft. Vita Vea, Greg Gaines, Kalijah Cansey, Yaya Diaby, Anthony Walker, Levante David, Hassan Reddick. You also have Chris Broswell, too, who you like to see something from this year. Zion McCollum, Antoine Winfield, Christian, Jamel Dean, Tyke Smith. Behind them, Ben Morrison and Jacob Parrish. Again, I want to reiterate, I do think the linebacking core could be upgraded in the future. Again, I would have probably picked Jahad Campbell in the 1st round, but again, that's why I'm not the general manager, and that's why I'm not making decisions. Emeka Egbuka is going to be a great player, and for all we know, Jahad Campbell is going to be a bust. I mean, I don't think he will be, but he might. For starters, this secondary is very deep, and it's just really solid. Antoine Winfield Jr. is one of, if not the best safeties in the NFL. Adding a Jamel Dean next to a Zion McCollum, and then adding Benjamin Morrison next to him, I think creates a nice trio of outside corners with some different ways to use each player. Tyke Smith, I do think, might move over to that safety position, which then allows Jacob Parrish to fill in the slot. I also could see a world where maybe they put Benjamin Morrison in the slot. I wouldn't bet on that, but maybe he could. It's a very nice secondary with a lot of versatility and just a lot of starting experience. I think the secondary should be really good next year. And then in the front 7, again, I would like to see some work done in the linebacking core, but I think you have a lot of variety with some pass rushers with Logan Hall, Elijah Roberts in the draft, Yaya Diaby can get to the quarterback here and there. And then, of course, you're banking on Hassan Reddick kind of returning back to form, and you also have Chris Broswell. Kalijah Cansey up the middle had 7.5 sacks via ESPN last year. Logan Hall had almost 6 sacks. Yaya Diaby almost 5 sacks, and of course Hassan Reddick in the past has been a pretty consistent pass rusher. So in totality, I think there's a lot of different ways to get to the quarterback. And again, I don't think this defense is going to be top 5 or anything like that. But when you look at where they were last year, they were about middle of the pack in most numbers, 17, 19, 16, relatively around the middle here. But they were a really good defense against the run. That's the benefit of having a Vita Vea. It just kind of happened to be that, surprisingly speaking, they weren't incredible against the pass. And I think in some ways, those numbers are kind of skewed just based off the fact that no team can actually run on this roster because of a guy like Vita Vea who's just so dominant against the run. But by them adding 2 more pieces to the secondary, I expect the secondary to take a nice step forward. And if you have an offense that's top 6 to top 5, and you pair that then with a defense that potentially takes a nice step forward and goes from like like a 16th, 17th best in the country, or in the league, I should say, to now like top 12. You're taking a nice step forward, and I think you're putting yourself in a position to where you can actually go out there and compete with the likes of the Eagles and Lions and Rams and so on and so forth. I also think it's important we look back at actually what's happened in recent playoff performances. In 2024, you lose by 3 to a Washington Commanders team that goes on to win or to go to the NFC Championship game. In 2023, you actually beat the Philadelphia Eagles. You then go on to have a really close and competitive game with Detroit, who, by the way, was fully healthy that season. So basically, ever since Baker Mayfield took over as a starting quarterback, this has been a really competitive team that's gotten to the playoffs, but hasn't been able to quite yet get over the hump. Like I've mentioned in the title of the video, they haven't been able to quite yet get over the likes of the Lions and Eagles and Commanders last year. But I think with their offseason moves and what we're going to talk about here for my third reason, I do think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have a legitimate shot to potentially go out there and make a run at a potential championship or an NFC Championship appearance. But let us go ahead and hop into my third reason as to why the Buccaneers could make a big jump into 2025 and get over the hump, and that is that I expect continuous growth from Baker Mayfield. Now let's get this out of the way. Baker Mayfield has had a very bizarre career in the NFL, spending the first 4 years with the Browns, some highs and some super lows, going to Carolina, almost at one point, almost being out of the league, going to the Rams, resurrecting his career, then getting his big break in Tampa Bay, and over the course of the last 2 years, the numbers speak for itself. In 2023, just over 4,000 passing yards, 28 touchdowns to 10 picks. He brought the Buccaneers to a playoff appearance after Tom Brady left the team. And then most recently last year, 4,500 passing yards, 41 touchdowns to 16 interceptions. Just an awesome year for a quarterback that I think is now starting to get a lot more respect for his game. And as we head into 2025, if Baker Mayfield can have a similar year productivity-wise and just maybe limit the turnovers a tad bit, talking about a guy that could be in conversations for Ps, for All Pros, and for Pro Bowls, which, you know, he was already kind of there last year, maybe not MVP conversations, but if he can take that step forward next year where he has 45 to 5,000 passing yards, let's just say 38 plus touchdowns, I'm not expecting 40, but if he can get like 35 plus or anything like that and keep the turnovers to less than like 11 or 12, I'm feeling really, really good about this Buccaneers offense. Again, as I've mentioned, thought their offseason was really productive. I think offensively speaking, they were fantastic last year. I expect them to be just as good, if not maybe even slightly better with the addition of Emeka Egbuka and Bucky Irving being fully committed to this team as the starter. And then with the defense also potentially taking some steps forwards in the secondary, I really think that Baker Mayfield has a chance to completely elevate his game, especially when they get to the playoffs where they've had a couple little small issues there. So in totality, what is my expectations for the Buccaneers? I expect them to get over the hump. I expect them to win playoff games, maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe even 3. We'll just kind of have to wait and see. Am I predicting them to beat the Lions, to beat the Eagles, or to beat any of those teams that are considered the top contenders in the NFC? Right now, it's hard to predict that, but I do think they have a shot. But y'all let me know in the comment section below, can the Buccaneers get over their hump? You tell me. And if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.